Koppitz, CEO of KATEK Group. Rainer, thanks for joining us, and thanks very much for your contribution to the latest What's the Scoop. It's been a big piece with some very diverse input. Obviously, supply chain's been big for everybody, and everything that's been going on in 2021 we've talked about and we know. But there are a couple of really interesting things in your feedback that I wanted to touch on. One of them was this kind of awareness of the CO2 situation and global warming and sustainability and all those issues as they relate to what we do. And the statistic that you gave me, that even with the world stood still through COVID, we were only able to reduce our CO2 output by 5%, which is ridiculous. Where do you see the solution? Where do you see technology's role, and where do you see your role as a manufacturing company?
Yeah, Phil. I mean, you're touching a very interesting point here, and those are some numbers which really made me, think about what needs to be done. And we have something like 51 billion tons of CO2 equivalents every year, and everybody was expecting that now during the COVID pandemic, when it was at the peak, that this would be a tremendous reduction of CO2 emissions, and at the end it was 5%. At the peak of the crisis. So 5% means that the world has to stand still in order to get to 5%. But we all knew we have to bring those 51 billion of tons down to zero if we want to survive on this planet. So it's very clear that just doing less of what we are doing today, consumption as well as production and energy producing, that's not the real solution. Maybe it gives all of us a good feeling to do something less, but honestly speaking, it's not the solution. And I think also the leaders, the politicians as well as the economic leaders, needs to tell to the people that there needs to be something different. And what is different? It needs to be innovation. It needs to be technology that will bring the solution. If not, we will fail. So everybody needs to think about how we can bring this forward and test out different kind of ways on how to reduce CO2. For instance, how to produce energy with much less CO2, but also how to do storage of energy. Those are the things we all need to think about and be very, very, very creative. So it's not everything is about making more money, but also innovation to save the planet. And that's my deep conviction, indeed, Phil.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting when I look at sustainability generally as an issue, and CO2 in particular, with respect to manufacturing. I think it kind of falls into different areas. It's the technology and products that you can get involved in manufacturing, whether that's solar power, whether that's wind power, whether it's battery technology, and it'll segue into what we're going to talk about next, which is EVs. There's an element of that, but there's also an element of how you make it. So there's a role you have as a manufacturing organization to look inside and say, hey, what can we do to improve the way we make stuff? Can we use more solar energy in our facilities? Can we change our energy mix? Can we make sure we make products more sustainably? There's a lot of ways to think about it, I think.
Yeah, and I think basically what we can do here as an electronics company, it's a kind of a threefold approach. Okay, the first one, of course, is whenever we do something, we need to make sure that it is as energy and CO2 efficient as possible, and we are just undergoing screening. Kind of a screening where we really check all of our locations, where we stand and what else we can do, and then to come up with a very, very clear schedule and how, and to do and when what. So that's the first part, and I think that's something that every company needs to do. Then the second thing is that, I mean, we are manufacturing, we are developing a lot of electronic system solutions devices. So I would say the main CO2 consumption is not, the development and the production of those kind of electronics, is when the electronics then will be used at the end customer. So we have to think about on how we can make whatever we produce more energy efficient. So for instance, if you look into just one example, into the arena of semiconductors, we need to think about how and when we should use, let me say, silicon carbide semiconductors instead of the traditional ones, as they can save, I mean, a lot of energy. So that's what we need to think about. How can we design and manufacture products that then will save energy when they will be in operation for 10, 15, 20 years, because that's even the bigger footprint. And then the third part of the solution where we can take part is that we develop and manufacture some of the products which can contribute to the innovation which we discussed before in order to reduce the footprint. And of course, we are deep believers that the solar energy and especially solar storage systems will be a big part of the solution, because it's not just enough to have solar panels on every roof. You also have to make sure that then during night or during winter or whatever, you also have energy available, and this comes along with storage systems. And as we won't have big centralized storages, because then you have upfront the energy transmission again, and you have some efficiency losses, etc. So this need to be kind of decentralized solutions, and I think that's absolutely doable already with the technology which is existing and which we also contribute to further improving. So home and stationary residential solar storage systems, that's something where we can contribute, because the efficiency driver number one there is all the kind of inverting technology, software and hardware. It's the power electronics, and that's exactly where we have a real stronghold. And the second one is that, I mean, as everybody in the industry, and I mean the automotive OEMs, is starting to produce, because they are forced more and more electric vehicles, I mean, it needs to be made sure that we also then have the necessary infrastructure for this, because if not, there will be no acceptance for this technology. And as we know from market studies, 80% of the installed base of those chargers will be residential chargers. So the people, the customers of electric cars, they need to have access to car chargers which are intelligent, meaning that they have a high degree of connectivity. They can connect to the smart home. You can upload new features overnight through over-the-air update functionality, etc. And to bring something like this to the market at a nice price point in order to make this really happen, I mean, that's the second big kind of bet we are doing here, as we think that this could be a real contribution of bringing the electric kind of cars really to a big success. If not, this definitely will fail.
Yeah, and you see EVs as a huge potential growth market. And one of the things that I've noticed in the EV market, particularly in Europe, is as the car makers move from internal combustion to EV, they're rethinking parts of their supply chain, and they're really valuing companies like KATEK in that new supply chain, because you are technology, you are electronics first.
Yes, that's totally true, and I mean that's an interesting observation, because I mean in the past it was always like this. An automotive OEM had certain kind of ideas, and then they were addressing some of the classic tier one automotive suppliers, and then those automotive suppliers, they delivered complete kind of component solutions, and for the electronics part, those companies were working together with companies like KATEK. So now with the EVs coming up, the automotive OEMs, they all of a sudden they see that the electronics part is becoming more and more important. And if they give this completely out of their hands to a kind of a supplier, I mean, then in future, their added value will be extremely limited, extremely poor. So what they are doing, they are rethinking everything, and they're saying, we want to really understand and develop the heart of it, all the electronics around the electric vehicle basics. And in order to do this, they also see that they don't really have everything in house. So what they are trying is to enter into kind of a co-development with companies like KATEK in order to develop the electronics for the future EVs. At the same time, having the know-how also in-house, so that they really can, have the IP, and that they are really, let me say, driving the innovation, and not just let the suppliers drive the innovation. And for a company like KATEK, as a real European leader, number 3 right now, I mean, that's a big opportunity. And also, if you come back to the other discussion, really to help to drive this EV journey pretty much with all the electronics know-how which we have.
No, I think it absolutely makes sense. And I think, the relationships that you have with customers are different to the relationships people were having with customers just 5 years ago, probably even just 3 years ago, pre-COVID. The next thing I wanted to pick up on your comments, and it was no surprise to me, was the sentence that starts with, "I expect more consolidation." And my response to that was, yep, so do I. We're seeing that everywhere. What kind of complexion do you see that? How do you see that consolidation continuing? I mean, it's quite fevered a little bit at the moment. It's quite busy, and people I think there's an awareness and a desire for scale. There's an awareness and desire to figure out how to deal with this China plus one, this regionalization thing. What are you seeing driving consolidation, and how do you see it continuing into 2022?
I mean, a few observations here. I mean, the first observation is, how fragmented the market is. You can easily see if you think that KATEK, it's a huge market. I mean, everybody needs electronics, the development, the manufacturing, everybody needs electronics. So the market is huge. But still, in Europe, a relatively small company like KATEK, I mean, now, a little bit more than €500 million in turnover, is together with Enix, the number 3 in Europe. I mean, how fragmented must the market be in order that someone who is just doing, half a billion is a number 3 in a huge market? So this says something about the fragmentation of the market, not about the size of KATEK. So first of all. Second one, what we see is acceleration of this concentration in the market, of this consolidation of the market. And why? First of all, I mean, also in Europe, private equity has entered into this market. I mean, 3 years ago, private equity was not interested in electronics. I mean, it was manufacturing, it was what they call asset heavy, blah, 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 all these kind of things. They were more investing into kind of platform businesses, etc. This has totally changed. And if you look into some of the acquisitions that has been, taken place over the last couple of years, that's been largely driven also by private equity now entering also in the European market. They are already active in the US for quite a few years, but now they are also entering into the European market. So next observation is that the factor of, let me say, local for local, and that, I mean, everybody wants to have partners in every part of the planet in order to do co-development and manufacturing. This is also further driving the consolidation and the M&A. For, I mean, let's just take Asian companies. I mean, all of a sudden they realize that they need something in Europe. in order to satisfy their European customers also in the future. So they are also looking, and they are kind of in a hurry. They are also looking for interesting, acquisitions in Europe. And the same is, of course, happening the other way around. We are looking for something in Asia because also our European customers, they want us to provide them local for local from an Asian factory, an Asian development department for their factory in Asia. I mean, so that's something which is also massively driving this. And then there's a last factor which we are seeing more and more. That's education. So most of the electronics, the EMS companies in Europe, they are more and more realizing, because there's a lot of education also from guys like you and Dieter Weiss from Informa and Eric Miskel, they are more and more realizing that if they are, let me say, smaller than 100 million euro, then maybe this looks like big in this fragmented market, but in reality, it's very, very small. They don't have purchasing power. They don't have the necessary degree of innovation that the customers wants them to have, etc. They cannot cover the full value chain, including development. So the management there and the shareholders, they are also thinking about, hey, we need to team up with someone, which is also driving M&A. And then the last factor, which is going to accelerate this, is of course, honestly speaking, cash. Because in the light of this crisis, and we've discussed this before, I mean, many of the companies, they see that even if they have cash on their bank accounts, that all the cash right now is going into their stock inventory, into their inventory. So if they want to see their cash, they don't go to the bank, they go to the inventory, to the stock, they can see their cash, and it's all sitting there. And it's still not decreasing because the crisis is still here. So, I mean, this is something where, some of the managing directors and the owners, they are not sleeping very well those days. And they think, of course, that it could be a solution to bring their company, into a partnership with maybe a bigger, more stable kind of player, which can afford, to finance this kind of stock increase, which is still not changing. So those are, I would say, the main drivers of the acceleration of the consolidation field.
Yeah, and they're drivers that aren't going away, and that's not going to change, and I think it's going to continue well into next year. I just wanted to wrap up by using a phrase that you used, and that's that you're building a European powerhouse in high-value electronics. Just give me a couple of sentences that explains what that means, because you and I have discussed that EMS just doesn't cut it in terms of a term. So a European powerhouse in high-value electronics.
There are two important parts in it. I mean, the first one is, of course, high-value electronics, and that's just to make a differentiation, a distinction between, let me say, mass electronics and electronics in industries where electronics is really complex, a combination of software and hardware, and makes really a difference. Okay, so it's not, let me just give you a good example. I mean, the electronics in an electronic, kind of teeth brush, that doesn't make sense. I mean, that's mass electronics. That's the typical CCC markets where the big American and Asian players can play a role. But I mean, that's not our competition. We are not interested in those kind of simple electronics, mass electronics. So that's the segment we are attaching is high value electronics, meaning really those electronics, they are defining the value of a product. It's really the major part in a product. And then the second one is European powerhouse. And that's again reflecting that the European industries like machinery, healthcare, renewables, whatever, I mean, they need strong electronics partners which help them to be successful in their market and lead them, in order to what to do in terms of electronics to be competitive also in the future. And, as the market is so fragmented, those kind of customers, they are looking for stable partners with a decent size, which are also still part of the market in 15 or 20 years, so they can build a really long-lasting, stable relationship on it. And we are one of the companies, and I hope many more will be joining us. We are one of the companies that will, kind of play this role in the European market.
Yeah, and I absolutely believe that you will. I think it's a very practical change that's going on in the industry. It's being forced by a lot of things. You talked about consolidation on the supply side, but when I look at it from the OEM point of view, they have to realize what's gone on this year and the effort that's been made by their suppliers to get them through this difficult period. And those that have been collaborative and are prepared to get deeper into that collaboration are the OEMs that are going to do well and are going to be served well. Those that have just said, hey guys, it's your problem. You mentioned CEOs having sleepless nights. I think there's plenty of supply chain managers on the OEM side that aren't getting too much sleep either. I'd wrap up by saying I agree with your last comment. I think next year could easily be the best year ever for the industry, particularly the European industry. Opportunities abound, and I'm pretty confident it'll be a wonderful year for KATEK, and I hope you'll continue to keep us and our audience informed about it. If we don't speak before, have a wonderful holiday season, and all the best for 2022. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Phil. We see 22 latest. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.